Before we get started with today's episode and our very interesting conversation with Michael Hengst, I do need to apologize very briefly that the first half of this episode was recorded in a very, very large, very, very echoey room on my side. So I do apologize for the audio that I just could not clean up afterwards. Enjoy the show.
American researchers of video game history are familiar with all the publications and companies that dotted the Anglo-Saxon or Anglophile scene. But there are many other places that also play games and many other places that had a very large impact on the world. And the perspectives, especially those given to the players by their publications and later on their producers in Germany are less well known outside of the German speaking world. I'm very, very pleased to have a guest with us today, a man whose writing I found very influential when I was but a wee gamer. And nowadays, his work, way beyond journalism, still resounds with us to this day. Welcome to the show. I should say it in German. Michael Hengst.
Well, hello there, and thank you for having me. I'm deeply honored, and I'm not so sure about that impact I had on the games industry. I'm just old. That's about it.
Think about it this way. Survival is a quality in and of itself.
That's true. That's true.
So, Michael, we always start out here with going all the way back to people's education. And just to get an idea where they're starting from before they get into the industry. So, give us a little bit of a rundown of what your educational background is.
Okay, so my educational background is basically middle school. I tried higher education once, but at one point that was blocked to me because my parents were divorced, and that was back in the early 70s. And at that point in time, it was I was sort of an outcast at the time. So I was at a high school, so to speak, and my teacher told my mother, that guy is not going anywhere because his parents are divorced, so better take him off school. So that's it. That's my education.
God.
So my mother took me off the school, so I went back to middle school. I made my exam there. I did my grades, and then I went to basically I started working at what do you think, 79. So I was 17 at that time. So I have I'm sort of an apprentice at that time. So I worked at a store. So I was selling carpets and wallpapers and colors. So I basically did the whole thing, the whole shebang for about 3 years. So I'm a certified seller of carpets and wallpapers. That's about it.
Okay, and now just a few bits of clarification for non-German listeners. When you're talking about middle school, you're talking about Realschule, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and just for everybody outside, the German school system is, well, there's a bunch of issues with the German school system, but this whole idea of the people who are going to go to university go into a thing called the Gymnasium. Everybody else pretty much goes to a thing called the Realschule, and that ends. Was it 10th grade for you back then, or 11th grade?
I think at that time it was ninth grade, so it was Realschule, or 10th grade, so 9 years of school. That's about it.
Yeah, gotcha. Sorry, just for clarification, since we have
no problem. So
Okay.
I never went to university. I never learned anything of substance. So that's about it.
Oh, come on! You were selling carpets. That was your substance. I mean,
Yeah,
there was.
I know. But I grew tired of selling carpets after a couple of years. So I went to sell video games, which was much more fun.
So, what year approximately do you make that change?
So that was back in 87, 88. So I lived in Hamburg at the time, and I worked at computer game store in Hamburg that was famous because it was the only store where you could buy video games. There was a Hamburger Softwareladen.
Okay.
And so I did that for about a year or so. And then I got a call from the guys at the PowerPlay magazine. And they asked me, okay, how about doing sort of a hint guide to Dungeon Master? Because I played Dungeon Master when it came out. I finished it over the weekend. And, well, I called them and told them, look, I have that issue, or I finished the game, and they asked me, okay, would you like to do a hint guide? So I did the hint guide. Yeah, in retrospect, it was not a very good one, though. But I mean, if I look at the style and how I wrote it, it was, yeah, not that good. But that was
Uh,
again,
just a quick question. Okay, so we got to go back here a little bit because you just
yeah.
gave a couple of big jumps there. So, uh, were you interested in computer games or video games before you started working at the shop, or
Yes,
what led?
yes, yes. So I played the first video game I ever played was Pong, and I played the arcade machine. So it's money versus playtime. And I was hooked at that time. I played Pong, I played Space Invaders, Asteroids, the whole thing. And then uh, well, that was basically it. So I started busy playing games, and I was working in well, it's not an arcade at that time. It's Germany is called a Spielhalle, where you have those slot machines mostly because they get the money out of it, and then you have a lot of arcade machines. So I used to work at one of those arcades, and I did spend all my money and on arcade machines. So I played the whole thing. I played Ghouls and Ghosts, Missile Command, uh, you name it, I played. And when the computers came out, I was always interested in computer games. So starting working for that computer game shop was basically natural for me. That was a big thing. And
Okay,
that's the
and what was
reason.
the first
Yeah, that's
machine?
well, playing games. That was the reason I was in contact with the magazine guys because at one point in time, I think early 80s or mid 80s, I was playing StarCross, the Infocom adventure, and I had one issue. And well, at that time, we didn't have Google, we didn't have hint guides. So the only thing that I could think of was calling the magazine. And at that time, Anatol Locker, he just started with the company and he could help me with that problem. And I called him the next day and thanked him for it. And that was it. So we kept busy calling each other. And a couple of years later, I finished Dungeon Master. I called him up. I said, well, look, I finished the game in 2 days. So, and he asked me, okay, can you do a hint guide? So I did that. And about a year later, he called me and told me that a bunch of people are leaving the magazine. And wouldn't it be great for me to move to Munich and start working for the magazine? Okay, I mean, playing games all day and getting paid for it, I'm all in. So, and I went to Munich, I had my interview, and they took me to, well, it was sort of a surprise, but they took me. And about 6 weeks later, I moved to Munich. And then I started working for the magazine. That's it.
So this was when PowerPlay stops being just a section of Happy Computer and becomes its own publication.
No, actually, it started being on its own. Sort of, they had a special issue every 2 months, so they had 6 issues on their own, and then it became part of Happy Computer, and that was the reason why people left the company at that time, because they were not happy about it, because the publishing company took the success of PowerPlay at the time to bolster sales of Happy Computer. And that's when I basically started. So I think the first issue was early January 1989, and that was already one of those thinner on thinner paper with a reduced page count. That was part of that Happy Computer thing.
Okay, gotcha.
But honestly, I didn't care at that time because, I mean, again, playing games all day, getting paid for it, what's not to like, right?
Okay, so when you arrived there, how do they explain the job? Obviously, I'm guessing your image was I get to play games all day, but how did they explain the job to you?
I was lucky because at that time Heinrich Lehnhardt was still working at the company, and he gave me basically a rundown on all the technical issues. So how to write an article, what to do, what not to do, keeping sort of the main body of the text as descriptive as possible. And then you have your own opinion, and then that's for later. That's separate text, and that's your personal opinion about the game. And then you have a monthly sort of a conference with all the editors and all the writers, and everyone chipped in. So if you're, and most of the time it was, we played games that only not one people or one person played the game, but at least 2 persons played one game, and that was a sort of a safeguard. Usually one person who liked the genre and maybe one that didn't like the genre. So that was, the ratings were always discussed, sometimes in length. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it was very interesting, but it sort of helped us not to get overboard with the ratings. So at that point in time, a rating over 80 points. So we had a rating system 0 to 100. So a rating over 80 points was one of the best ratings you could get. So, and we had the strict rule that 50 points is average. That's it. So today, if you have an average title and a rating of 80, and sometimes, what? What are they thinking? So at that time, it was very, and I'm very thankful about going through that school. Sometimes it was very interesting, very tough, and you have to understand that at that point in time, desktop publishing was not heard of. We did everything on paper except for writing the article. We printed out on a needle printer. All the layout was done on paper, and pictures. There was no screenshot feature on most of the games, so we had a dark chamber, and we took photographs of that particular scene. Sometimes we needed two people because one had to play the game and the other one had to take the pictures. So every single day, we were giving our processing company sort of a bag full of film cartridges, and we were getting it back next day. And we took 2 or 3 pictures, sometimes more, and actually glued them to the paper. That's about it.
That must have made, well, you had to pre-plan how big each image was going to be in that
Yes.
format because
Yes.
you had to standardize. So looking back at the review format in that happy computer insert period, it was usually a half a page per review, if I remember correctly.
Well, the half a page is sort of what we call sort of a short test. So most of it, or most new games, are at least 1 page or bigger, depending on the game. If it's a good game, it's usually 2 pages or even more. So yes, but we had a we had a plan. We had the whole thing planned out for that issue, and sometimes we had a little wiggle room. We knew, okay, there's a new game coming out from this company, so we put it in at the last minute. However, everything that was in that magazine at that time, when you bought the magazine at the store, all the information was about 3 months old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, and this is another question then, because what was the system like for you guys receiving copies of the games? Because I mean, if I remember, German distribution of a game that came out originally in the United States wasn't necessarily going to be happening simultaneously. Usually there was a big delay. Did you only, or what was the policy? Wait for the publisher to send you a copy, go out and get a copy? What was that?
Well, depending on the game, and it was basically that thing called telephone, and not a cell phone, but a landline or a fax, fax machine. So we had pretty good contacts for example, in the United States or in the UK. So we always could talk to the developers and, of course, the publisher / distribution company in Germany. So sometimes, well, they never had sort of an embargo or issues with us testing a game that's coming out in 3 months. So, but most of the time, we just called the developers, and they were sending us a copy. And that itself took time, right? I mean, okay, first of all, and it was awfully expensive at that time. So calling the United States from Germany, that was expensive. Getting the sample, that was interesting because they had to ship it via UPS, or I don't know if they had FedEx at that time, but it usually took about a week or so to get the copy of the game. So yeah, so or calling them, getting sort of an interview was okay. Sometimes they didn't have time, and you had to plan it in advance, and sometimes it was just at a show. But that was sort of a good thing, a blessing, and a curse at the same time. So going to a show, today people are writing the articles at the show, right at the booth. They're busy typing in the machines. For us, it was different. So we went to the show, we talked to the people, we took notes, and we collected all the materials. So I had an extra empty suitcase usually for all the materials I was getting. And I was taking that home and I was writing my article back home. Because at that time, I had time. I knew, okay, when I come back, I have 2 more weeks to the deadline. I can write my article. That's fine. If I have additional questions, I call them up. But that's about it.
Okay, wow. So the lead times on all of this stuff. So you have all these games. You're either getting them from the developers, they're being sent in, you're getting them from different points of the world. Uh, what was the decision-making process like on which games to include and which games to leave out? Or was there always an attempt to keep everything you could test in the individual issues?
At that time, it was basically, okay, is it a good game or not? So never had that problem that, okay, it's going to be the next AAA thingy. So at that point in time, it was never an issue of, okay, there are 50 million marketing budget behind it. And it was purely, okay, is it a good game, yes or no? That's it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And so, given the sheer number of games that were showing up, and we probably also need to talk about the multiple formats that were out at that time, since you joined in '89, so you still had some 8-bit formats like the Commodore 64
Yeah.
still ghosting around. And PowerPlay, for those not in the know, was not just a computer game review magazine, but it also did video games.
Yeah.
So there was this massive plethora of ports, massive plethora of platforms, massive plethora of games. How much time was actually dedicated to individual reviews, and how was that time allotted? How did you plan that out?
Well, first of all, well, there were a lot less games than you have at the moment. So I mean, I just saw an article that last year alone, about 14,000 new games came out on Steam alone. I mean, that's going to be a nightmare. I mean, but at that time we had, I don't know, just a couple of hundred every year. That's it. And time-wise, it was again that was depending on the quality of the game. Most games at that time, I still do that these days. I finished.
Oh,
So
wow.
if it's a two-page review or a three-page review, most of the games I finished. And that's the same thing today. So most games I play these days or write about, I finish. Not nearly as many as I did back in the day, but still. And for games that are not that good, at least 3, 4, 5 hours to get a solid opinion about, okay, why is it not a good game?
Gotcha.
That was really hard sometimes. I mean, if you have a game that's not really good and you know after 10 minutes it's not going to be better, then you have to play it for another 5 hours. Eh. But I mean, the thing is, we saw it as our basic duty to inform the players about our opinion and to get sort of a valid opinion, you have to play the game.
Gotcha.
And if you
Gotcha.
just read the sales sheet or if you look at the package and then write an article about it, that's not good service.
Gotcha. Now, if you were not the lead tester on a game,
Yeah.
how would you invest less time, or would you still try to finish the game even if you weren't the lead tester?
Again, I mostly finished all of my games. And it doesn't matter if I was the lead tester or not. Sometimes later, I admit I used editors or Hengst editor at that time because I have my favorite genres at the time, or still, are role-playing games, strategy games, and simulations. And with role-playing games, so if you get the sixth gold box game at that time, sort of a SSI Advanced Dungeons and Dragon role-playing game, that looks very, very similar to the one that came before, use an Hex editor to beef up your party. And then, okay, yeah. So yeah, later on, yes. Sometimes, yes.
Gotcha. And so that does bring up the question of the genres. And like you said, you try to get a person who is good at a genre and a person who's not, who likes the genre, and another person who's not as fond of it, to sort of give a balanced view of the games. Now, what were the criteria that were then used in those discussions that you were talking about? Because PowerPlay was very unique in the sense that you could often have an opinion box, and you guys had that wonderful method of the different faces, the photos. So you could have maybe the main opinion piece would be like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but then the valuation would maybe be a 75.
Yeah.
So what did you guys have any concrete guidelines, or was it just coming out of the discussion for where to place those overall values?
The overall value was basically sort of, at that time, was basically, okay, how much fun do I have playing the game? So did I enjoy playing the game? Did I think that the developer did a pretty good job? But mostly it was, okay, how much fun did I have playing the game? How much did I enjoy playing the game? That was basically the biggest tag on the value. So, and of course, sometimes we had the value tag on graphics, but it was never. Well, yeah, I would say fun and enjoyment was the biggest issue on that overall value. And sometimes, and that was the reason. Okay, I like role playing games a lot, so I'm probably in favor of role playing games mechanics and how I enjoy that game. If it's a decent role playing game, and someone who is not enjoying himself or herself at that time tells me, okay, I saw something that's not that good in comparison to other games. So, and then we have that issue that I think is the greatest game ever, and it's got a 75.
Gotcha.
Which is a good thing, though. Which is a good thing because people know after a while, okay, that editor, he knows what I like. So I go for his face and I don't care about the number of value. And other people, okay, I'm not sure if I should buy that game because, okay, he's excited about it, but I know he likes role-playing games, but the value is a little less than I was expecting. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Now, when so in '89, it's fairly safe to say that consoles didn't make up as much of the content of the magazine yet. But as the '90s began, that started taking up a larger and larger portion of the magazine. Especially, you guys did a lot of coverage of the PC Engine, which never actually got an official release in Germany. So I need to ask, what was and looking at it from the point of view of somebody who also had access to American magazines and Spanish magazines, the advertising or the value for advertisers, or what was the role of advertisers for the magazine as far as a financing standpoint? Because covering games that are not actually commercially available just doesn't seem to match up with what would be true in the States for the economics of magazines.
I mean, that was very important for the publishing company. So the prices for advertising games was very high. However, we never had that issue that we never had sort of an issue where advertisement comes to us and tells us, okay, you have to sort of vote in favor for that game because they're booking some sort of advertisement for the next 12 months. So that was strictly sort of split. There was split between the advertisement section and the editorial section. And honestly, we didn't like each other that much. I mean, the ad guys, they were busy sales guys, right? I mean, they're wearing a suit, tie, and they're no, we were gamers. That's it. We don't care about ad revenue. The publishing company was all they were for them it was very important because a large portion of the income was advertisement.
Okay.
But for us, it was never an issue.
How big was it approximately?
At that time, I didn't know. I found out later that I would say roughly 80% of the income is from advertisement and the rest is from selling the magazine.
Oh, wow. That is a very, very big, a big split or a big emphasis on advertising.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you have to understand. I mean, during its heydays, I think a page in 4-color was about 2,000 euros at that time.
Okay.
And if you look at the magazine, let's say 150 pages, but half of it is advertisement. So that's a lot of money, right? And then they have those full colored 4C 1 pages or even 2 pages. Then they have the small ads for people selling games or selling machines. Those are very cheap, but the number of it that's a nice additional bracket. So, and I think peak was about 150, 160,000 copies. So, and if you look at the price at that time, that was about €3 and something.
Yeah.
So you have production, you have distribution, you have VAT. It's not that many euros per copy of a game, of the magazine. So it's not 150. Honestly, my best guess today would be, okay, they made about 50 cents, maybe €1 on each magazine. So it's if you take €1 and it's 150,000 copies, it's 150,000 euros. That's not a lot.
No. That I mean, that's not going to pay for a lot. There's expense, and it was a high quality publication. I mean, the paper was good, color was amazing. So going back to the rise of the video game section in the magazine, which obviously then also creates the spin-off magazine Video Games.
Yeah.
So how were the console and handheld games perceived? How did you guys measure how popular they were with the PowerPlay readership?
Well, that was basically us, or at that point, the split video games, that was basically Heinrich. So first of all, coming back to the PC Engine, one reason why the PC Engine took a huge part of that publication was we were a big fan of it. Not only the machine, but also the games. I mean, the games were mostly very good. And they were, I mean, it was great. They were on that little cartridge, and there was no loading time whatsoever. The machine was very nice, very small. And we had a shop in Munich where we got all the imported stuff and all the, at that time, you never had one machine, first of all, and then most machines were modified to play different games from Japan, United States. So you had little dip switches, and you could switch between 50 hertz, 60 hertz, American version, and so on. So we had all that. But at that time, video games basically took off, and we found out that, okay, we don't have enough room in the PowerPlay magazine to cover all of them or most of them as they should be covered. So we decided to split, okay, we have PowerPlay for home computers and the ever-growing PC at that time. And then we have video games for video games. That's it. And that was a decision, okay, Playbase goes, output, we have more games coming in every month and giving them more room, and it was becoming more important. So here we go. That was the reason behind it.
Gotcha. Now, the question with the imported games and getting access to them through an import shop in Munich begs the next question. So you talked about going to shows and talking to developers on the phone. How did that, or were those your only sources for information? Because you also had news sections and so forth in the magazine. Yeah. How big of a role was it, if at all, checking out foreign publications? And what was the role of language in all of that? So how many people in the staff could understand enough English or Japanese to be able to get that information?
Well, first of all, talking on the phone was basically our main source of information, and going to shows. So we knew what's coming up. So again, at that point in time, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Google, we didn't have nothing. Internet was not there yet. So that basically came mid end to end 90s. So we knew from discussions with publishing companies or developers what is coming. And language was always a big issue. I mean, talking to Japan was basically out of the question because no one at the office could speak Japanese. Later on, we had one Japanese guy working at video games. That was easier. For us, it was very difficult to talk to Japan. So we were going to the store and check out the new releases. That was it. So, and I mean, talking in Japanese was out of the question. We played Japanese games though. Yeah. So that was basically by trial and error, figuring out the menus. And okay, we didn't understand anything about the storyline, but we figured, okay, it's interesting. So that was basically part of the fun. I know that Vinnie Foster and I were fond of playing strategy games. So that at one point in time, he came along with Advanced Military Commander. And that's sort of still one of the best strategy games you can play. Unfortunately, it was in Japanese only. The manual had 200 pages.
Wow.
It was awfully complex. It took me about a week to figure out the basic functions of the game. And then, yeah. So I'm playing it now, so to speak, on an emulator. I still play it once in a while. And I played, for example, Legend of Zelda, Ocarina. No, not Ocarina. It was,
Link to the Past?
yeah, I played that. I played the Japanese version when it came out on uh, American Super Nintendo, and I couldn't find the power glove that you needed to lift heavy objects. So what do you do? So again, no internet. So I was calling Nintendo in Japan
Oh,
from
wow.
Germany. Yeah, from Germany. So I called them up. First of all, it took about 25 minutes to get one on the line who spoke English. And he actually spoke a little German because he went to Oktoberfest. Yeah. So his German was 1, 2, 3 Zufall, and that's about it. And his English was not much better, so he couldn't help me. So after about an hour or 45 minutes, I got back off the phone. So I took a day, I took a break, and after a day, I figured it out myself. But I got the invoice for that phone call about a couple of weeks later, and that phone call alone was about, I think, 900 euros.
Oh, Jesus.
Anyway, so maybe it was a little less, but it was awfully expensive. So, but yes, so Japanese, we played Japanese versions. We didn't understand it. We found out, okay, does it come to the West? Yes or no? We knew that a lot of people in Germany played those games because they liked them so much. So we tested Japanese versions basically based on the same principle. Is it fun to play? Yes or no?
Gotcha. Now,
And yeah.
well, so now, and again, this goes a little bit, I guess, to what kind of feedback did you have from the audience, from the readership about those kind of reviews? Because I remember I was a reader of PowerPlay from 92 through 94.
Yeah.
I was living in northern Germany at the time. And I remember seeing so many of those reviews with the kanji all over the screens and stuff. And I was always kind of wondering because it was way beyond anything I could afford to even think of, imported games, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. I was a user. So the question I always had was, how big is the audience really for this? Or was it maybe just people like me who just found it fascinating to read and hear about these games that were on the other side of the planet?
I mean, we were getting a lot of letters every month, and people were busy, sort of very positive about the selection of the games and positive about how big the portion of imported games is. Or so we were busy confident and were encouraged by our readers to, okay, go ahead, test it. I mean, that was
Gotcha.
part of that diversity at that time that people were actually enjoying. I mean, as you said, most of the readers were they're probably not going to a store and asking for a game like that, because at that point in time, we had about 3, 4, maybe 5 specialized stores in Germany that actually imported stuff from overseas or had that your console modified. So it was not sort of a common thing, but that was part of the thrill, because that was part of that interesting, so the window through the world. So I have that German magazine that also covers American cartridges, Japanese cartridges or games. That was a sort of small window to the world. That was part of
It definitely it made it feel bigger. It made the hobby feel bigger.
Yeah.
Now, there is a topic that always comes up in discussions of the German game industry or game availability in Germany when you're looking at it from the English language standpoint, and that is the question of violence in games.
Yeah.
So, what were some of the guidelines or problems that you guys ran into when reviewing games that were on the violent side of things?
I mean, at that time, it was not that it became, or at that point in time when I started, it was not that big of an issue. It became an issue later on. So there are games that were on the index or 18 plus, so we were not allowed to review it. Example, I just did a sort of a retro piece on Carmageddon. That I think the original came out in 97 or 94, whatever. So that was so in that case we enjoyed playing the original one, but we had to wait for the official German version to put it into the magazine. I think it happened once that, and that goes down not only to the reviews and the stuff we cover, but that also goes down to the small advertisement stuff in the game, in the small, in that section. Because if someone is promoting a game that's on the index, the magazine could be pulled off the shelves. So you had to be very careful to have games in there advertised that are not sellable in Germany. So that became sort of an issue, but that was much later. At the beginning, it was easy. I mean, we didn't care about, I don't know, okay, it's a wild game, so on. Big deal.
Gotcha.
And
now,
yeah,
sorry.
At that time, we never had, I mean, that became, I think, a trend later that the games are violent because of the violence. So violence became sort of the sole purpose of that game. And some games are not even that good. So that was easy to say, oh, look, it's a shitty game, so you just don't cover it. That's it.
And then Doom happened. Well,
Wolfenstein. Before that, Wolfenstein came out, and I'm not sure if we reviewed it. I honestly have to check. Everyone played it. I played the original American version. I'm not sure if we actually reviewed it in the magazine. I have to check about that.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think you guys bypassed it, and there was one brief preview of Doom.
Yeah, so it might be okay. We made a preview, and then was shut down from the German government or FSK at the time. The that part that took care of all the ratings, and then we never thought sort of did the review, but we all played it. Of course, we played it.
Now, in games and I have to say this, I was living I'm originally from the States, but grew up in Argentina. I get to Germany in '92. And one of the things that struck me was a certain tone in the magazines whenever the discussion of violence came up. So I noticed this in several reviews that suddenly it'd be like, well, the game is really good, but the subject matter is really bad taste. And you would see a valuation that seemed to push it down a little bit, even though gameplay wise it seemed to be okay. And this was something I wasn't used to from American magazines or Spanish magazines where they're like, violence, that's good. Was that something that you guys were conscious of, or am I just reading too much into it?
No, I think we are very conscious about it. Sometimes it was just too much. I mean, why? Again, do you have to show that violent behavior in the game? It's not adding stuff to the game. Sometimes, okay, the background is sort of violent background. Not again. We already had that a couple of times. So why do we choose to do that? I mean, sometimes I think it was most of the case that it was a game that maybe it's good, but the violence is basically putting it over the top. So why do we need that? Is it adding anything to the fun of the game? And no. And honestly, by heart, I mean, pretty basically all our stuff. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm a snowflake. I'm a lefty, so to speak. I'm leftist. If I go through a small town in Texas, they would probably crucify me and burn me on the stake. I mean, that happened. Well, it never happened to me, but I had the issue I was living, obviously, in Bavaria at that time and in a little town outside of Munich. They had that church going on every 15 minutes, and I was buying the only stuff. I bought a Spiegel, so that news magazine, the only copy of it in the whole town. And
wow.
So people knew the lefty, right? I'm a snowflake. I'm a socialist. Yeah. So
Gotcha.
yeah, and we probably all have that issue towards violence. So I understand why it happened, and I'm not saying that I'm not a violent person, but under certain circumstances I could be. But it sometimes is it necessary for the gameplay value? No.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, when you start getting into the early '90s with Mortal Kombat, Wolfenstein, Doom, and so forth, there seemed to be a period of time when it was just let's one up the next guy.
Yeah.
When the video games magazine gets spun off, now for a while at least you're doing double duty, or you're writing for both of the magazines, and it was shared between the two magazines. What was the strategy there? Was it to bring in more experienced people? Was it to be able to reuse the testing time? How did that work out?
I think at the beginning it was basically okay. The core team is basically writing for both magazines because to bring some familiar faces to the new magazine and to cut costs. That was basically sort of it. later on, they brought in a bunch of new people because the magazine was taking off, and it was sort of more interesting work-wise for us to do more stuff in PowerPlay magazine or concentrate on one magazine and instead of doing stuff for both magazines. So, and because the video game magazine was taking off, it was not necessary for us to write for both magazines anymore. So, I think it's both. So it's showing off. We can do both, and it's a cost issue at the beginning, or was a cost issue. Yeah.
And so ultimately, was it up to you to decide which way you were going to go, which magazine you were going to stick with, or was there an editorial or publishing decision on that?
I think there was a little bit of both. So I decided, okay, I stick with PowerPlay magazine, and that's it. And I think I left not long after that, so I think I left in '95. That was it.
Yeah. And before we leave that part of your career, I do have to ask. I mean, you said you're mainly role-playing strategy simulation type of player, which tends to be more on the side of the PC than consoles. I do. Yeah, you're right. Depending on the definition of the genres. But I do have to just ask a quick question about your somewhat infamous review of Super Mario All-Stars.
I did Super Mario All-Stars. Can't even remember.
It was everybody else in the office loved it, and I believe you called them marionettes for wanting to play the older games. But if you don't remember anything about it, that's okay. It's something that stuck with me.
Honestly, I have to just make a quick check about. I think I was never a big fan of Super Mario. That was typically not my genre, and I never had sort of. I was never fond of that heavy-set Italian plumber as a main character. I admire the design though. So I admire that it's a fun game to play, and I played basically, I think, every single Mario game that came out after that. So I played Super Mario Bros. 3. I recently played Super Mario Wonders. But sometimes I just tell people, okay, it's I need to play it because I need it for my profession, but it's sometimes, I mean, it's just amazing on, okay, how they did certain design choices and what they put into the game, and it's still a great game, don't get me wrong. I don't like Mario. I don't like my. So if I have a choice between the next Zelda game or Super Mario, I'm Team Zelda.
Gotcha.
So as the video magazine Video Games is taking over the console thing, and this is going into the period of PowerPlay when I wasn't reading it anymore, unfortunately, because I wasn't in Germany. Did PowerPlay drop all the console coverage, or was there what was the editorial thought process there about the role of PowerPlay?
At that time, we probably, honestly, I have to check out, but I think we dropped basically all of the console stuff, and we concentrated more on PC side because PC or personal computer at the time, IBM took off. So it was more like it was becoming more like a PC magazine. I mean, all the home computers like Atari, Amiga, they basically died off at one point, and then it became PC market. And that's it. So we had a PowerPlay doing mostly PC, and then we had video games doing all the console stuff.
Gotcha. Now, did that have any significant impact on the readership, on the number of issues that you could sell each month?
Actually, not that much. So we were busy expanding our readership. Problem, well, it started earlier, but the biggest problem came in '95. So a lot of stuff we suggested to our management didn't go through. I mean, the one thing that really stuck to me was I suggested, okay, like everyone else, okay, let's have a cover-mounted CD, right? Because it's a good service for everyone else. And one of the managers at the time was a big fan of old records. Not renewal, but shellac.
Vinyl, yeah.
No, not vinyl.
Oh,
even older than that.
Okay.
So, and he told me, I was sitting in the meeting, and he told me that CD stuff's not going anywhere. So that's okay.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me!
No, that's modern CD stuff. That's not going anywhere. That's the quality is not good enough, but at the end, it was my take on that. It was just too expensive to have a cover mount CD. So,
but
yeah.
Other magazines, I mean, the magazines from CP Verlag, the CP, they started doing cover discs for their Amiga magazine, and then cover CDs, and discs first, and then CDs for PC Games magazine.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been kind of obvious that there was a discrepancy there in the market.
Yeah, but that was basically too late for me because I was sitting there, okay, all our suggestions are basically rejected. So, nah. I mean, I remember that one meeting, we had a big meeting with the management where they asked us, okay, or they asked all the different writers, all the different editor-in-chiefs of the magazines, come up with some special issues, different magazines, and all that stuff. So we had a bunch of magazines say, okay, let's do sort of a special edition on hard drives and server architecture and whatnot. And we had a different approach. We had that idea of doing a cheap version of PowerPlay magazine every 2 weeks instead of every 4 weeks, bigger format, and for a smaller price. So basically the computer build Spiele.
Gotcha.
So,
yeah. What we would call a tabloid in English.
Yes. So our management was laughing it off, right? The only guy who was not laughing was Kopek. Kopek was the later inventor and editor-in-chief of the computer games Spiele and computer build Spiele, computer whatever.
So, basically it goes to, and for American listeners, Bild is the Germany's largest tabloid magazine.
Yes.
The newspaper has been for forever, and they have the biggest circulation computer magazine for a while now.
I didn't know that at that time, but he was the only one in the room not laughing because obviously he had the same idea and he was sending it to a competitor, right? So, and then I left. Honestly, I left the company a couple of months later, so that was it.
Now, just to give an idea, during these years, so we're talking 90 through 95 or 90. When did you leave? 96?
Yeah, I leave 95.
95.
I
Okay.
left 95,
Yeah.
you're right.
So during that period of time, I mean, how significant was the magazine publishing? So PowerPlay, video games, to Markt and Technik as far as the whole size of the company?
I mean, that was basically, the whole company was basically based on publishing magazines. So we had the PowerPlay magazine, we had the C64, we had an Amiga magazine, PC magazine. They did nothing else. They did only, but they sort of, because everything was working fine, we are not going to change anything, right? So we stick to the stuff we do, and that's it.
Oh, wow.
And back in 95 or even in 94, all the competitors starting to emerge. Like we had the Computec from Nuremberg. We had later the Springer that came, I think, 96. But we had a couple of people leaving Markt Technik and going to build their own magazine, like Heinrich and Boris. They went to do PC Player. A couple of guys went from video games to founding Mania. So out of basically the same reason. So they had all those great ideas, and the company didn't want to do that. And they were just happy about how things were, because at that time, PowerPlay magazine was the biggest magazine, and out of whatever reason, they probably thought, okay, it's the biggest magazine now; it's going to be the biggest magazine in 10 years. No, it's not.
So sad, because I mean, oh well. So now, before we get really into all the things you did afterwards, because I think that's actually almost more interesting than the magazine. It's magazine time, because you do go from there and eventually end up in the video game industry proper.
Yes.
So let's go back to your time in the magazine. You're obviously covering a lot of international games, your LucasArts and all this stuff. But you're also covering German and Austrian game production.
Yeah, well,
game producing.
Not so much Austrian stuff, but mostly German stuff, because we didn't at the time. I don't think Austria had that many developers. They came sort of later after I left.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Sorry, I've got one or two names in the back of my head, but you're right. That would have been after 95.
Yeah.
So, what was PowerPlay's relationship like with those developers, and what was your view of, sorry, let me go back. For my international listenership, can you give a brief overview of how big and how sophisticated the German games industry is at that point?
Yeah, at that point, I mean, we had a bunch of developers. So we had the Blue Byte, for example, now Ubisoft. That was one of the biggest. We had Rainbow Arts. That became sort of FunSoft, one of the big distribution and production companies in Germany. We had Bomico at the time. So the Bomico was a distribution company, and then they had Sunflowers. Sunflowers was a development side. And most of the developers, like the guys from Moonlight and the guys from Rainbow, most of them they came out of the demo scene. So they did a lot of cracking, and they did a lot of intros for their version. So technically, they were very good. And from the Rainbow Arts arm, I mean, one of the biggest German developer was Factor 5. they moved to the United States, worked for LucasArts, and but that also tells you something because they were good enough and they're brilliant enough to move out of Germany because Germany at that time was very small, very focused on German stuff. So German games were at that time very known for we have all those giant games, so all those business simulations, right? Hotel simulation there, factory simulation here, and well, we have a couple of action games, but they're pretty good, but they're not as popular as the things that came from Japan or from Britain at that time. The UK was very, very, that was basically our action market. So all the nice action games that came out of England.
Gotcha. Now all those simulation games.
Yeah.
Did you feel, or was there a feeling that those were being made because those were the games that the developers wanted to make, or was it because the publishers saw that as a niche that they could take on?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think most of them at that time, so they made basically games for the German market, and it was profitable at that time. It was okay to do just a game for the German market. You sold 25,000 copies, 35,000 copies, and that was fine. But I never had that feeling, except for Factor 5 and some of the guys at Blue Byte, that they're thinking about, okay, let's do something for a bigger audience. Why not going globally? Why not going to address not the German audience? Why not going to do something else, something bigger?
Gotcha.
That was one thing. And then, of course, the financial issue, because if you want to do something bigger, I mean, at that point in time, most of the time, it was, I don't know, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, up to, let's say, the budget was 500,000 euros, or marks at that time, so 250,000 euros, if it was an expensive title.
Yeah.
I mean, for 250,000 euros, you're not getting that much today, right?
That's definitely true. Now, did the mix of platforms that they were developing for was, I guess that must have also been dictated by the German market. So Atari ST, Amiga, and PC seem to be important platforms for a much longer time than in the United States or elsewhere. Was that ever something that you would discuss with developers, or what those limitations meant for them?
Honestly, at that time, no.
Okay.
So it was just a question, okay, what are you going to, what's the game coming out for? Is it 64 or is it Amiga, Atari ST? And that was it. So we were just interested in, okay, what are the platforms you were developing for? That's it.
Okay.
So we never asked why or what's the limitation.
Gotcha. So those issues of trying to analyze the industry would not have been a part of your job as a games journalist at that moment.
No, not at that time. I mean, the thing is, we never had reason, or we never had reason to question all that or to dig deeper in that. I mean, we were all hobbyists. I mean, we were just playing games and writing about them. That's about it.
Gotcha.
That's about it.
And I do have to ask, because a friend of mine, I've told him we were doing this interview, who was also a big reader back in the day, and he wanted to know, I'm not sure how jokingly he asked the question, but he wanted to know, Was it just the big guys sitting around playing games all day long party that he had dreamed working at PowerPlay would have been back then?
Yes and no. Well, most of the time, I would say about 85 to 90% of the time, we were being on the phone, calling developers, publishers to get more stuff into the office. We wrote the article, we did all the layout stuff, all the administration issues, and most of the time we played at home.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and that was not only me. I mean, most of the time we played at home, except for at the beginning doing the pictures. I mean, those had to be done at the office because we had that dark room, and that was it. So most of the time it was, yes, it was games related, but it was more like a normal office job, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, okay. That actually makes sense. Makes sense. And the writing side of it.
Yeah.
Would you also do that at home, or was that being done on PCs?
Well, that was mostly done on. That was not mostly. That was done on PC, and I think I started with Microsoft Word 3 point whatever. So we had a template that Boris Schneider at the time, he did sort of template for us, and I think we used it for 5 years. So that was it. And so most of the articles I personally wrote, and I assume all my colleagues did as well, we wrote them back at the office.
Gotcha. Okay, then I think we need to move from PowerPlay onto your life post PowerPlay. And yeah, so if you don't mind, I would probably then say this would be a good place to stop the session, and then we pick it up with the life after PowerPlay.
Sure.
Perfect. I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.